Okay, let's just jump right into it, don't we?
Yeah.
In the case of animals with separate sexes, facility and I'm not recording this. I should be. Went through a whole bunch of effort just to be able to do it, so I might as well. Alright. And mark. So 45 seconds in. In the case of animals with separate sexes, facility in preventing crosses is an important element of success in the formation of new races, at least in a country which is already stocked with other races. Just adjusting the mic so it's appropriate. At least in a country which is already stocked with other races. In this respect, enclosure of the land plays a part. Wandering savages or the inhabitants of open plains rarely possess more than one breed of the same species. Pigeons can be mated for life, and this is a great convenience to the fancier, for thus many races may be kept true, though mingled in the same aviary, and this circumstance must have largely favored the improvement and formation of new breeds. Pigeons, I may add, can be propagated in great numbers and at a very quick rate, and inferior birds may be freely rejected, as when killed they serve for food. On the other hand, cats, from their nocturnal rambling habits, cannot be matched, and although so much valued by women and children, we hardly ever see a distinct breed kept up. Such breeds as we do sometimes see are almost always imported from some other country, often from islands. Although I do not doubt that some domestic animals vary less than others, yet the rarity or absence of distinct breeds of the cat, the donkey, peacock, goose, etc., may be attributed in main part to selection not having been brought into play. In cats, from the difficulty in pairing them; in donkeys, from only a few being kept by poor people, and little attention paid to their breeding; in peacocks, from not being very easily reared, and a large stock not kept; in geese, from being valuable only for two purposes, food and feathers, and more especially from no pleasure having been felt in the display of distinct breeds. To sum up the origin of our domestic races of animals and plants, I believe that the conditions of life from their action on the reproductive system are so far of the highest importance as causing variability. I do not believe that variability is an inherent and necessary contingency under all circumstances. With all organic beings, as some authors have thought, the effects of variability are modified by various degrees of inheritance and of reversion. Variability is governed by many unknown laws, more especially by that of correlation of growth. Something may be attributed to the distinct action of conditions of life. Something must be attributed to the use and disuse. The final result is thus rendered infinitely complex. In some eyes, I do not doubt that the intercrossing of species, aboriginally distinct, has played an important part in the origin of our domestic productions. When in any country several domestic breeds have once been established, their occasional intercrossing, with the aid of selection, has, no doubt, largely aided in the formation of new subbreeds. But the importance of the crossing of varieties has, I believe, been greatly exaggerated, both in regard to animals and to those plants which are propagated by seed. In plants which are temporarily propagated by cuttings, buds, etc., the importance of crossing both of distinct species and of varieties is immense, for the cultivator here quite disregards the extreme variability both of birds and mongrels, and the frequent sterility of hybrids. But the cases of plants not propagated by seed are of little importance to us, for their endurance is only temporary. Overall, these causes of change, I am convinced that the accumulative action of selection, whether applied methodically or more quickly, or unconsciously and more slowly, but more efficiently, is by far the predominant power. Chapter 2 of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, or the preservation of favored races through natural selection. Variation under nature. Variability, individual differences, doubtful species, wide-ranging, much diffused, and common species vary most. Species of the larger genre in any country vary more than the species of the smaller genre. Many of the species of the larger genre resemble varieties in being very closely but unequally related to each other and in having restricted ranges. Before applying the principles arrived at in the last chapter to organic beings in a state of nature, we must briefly discuss whether these latter are subject to any variation. To treat this subject at all properly, a long catalogue of dry facts should be given, but these I shall reserve for my future work, nor shall I here discuss the various definitions which have been given of the term species. No one definition has as yet satisfied all naturalists, yet every naturalist knows, vaguely, what he means when he speaks of a species. Generally, the term includes the unknown element of a distinct act of creation. The term variety is almost equally difficult to define, but here, community of descent is almost universally implied, though it can rarely be proved. We have also what are called monstrosities, but they graduate into varieties. By monstrosity, I presume, is meant some considerable deviation of structure in one part, either injurious or not useful to the species, and not generally propagated. Some authors use the term variation in a technical sense, as implying a modification directly due to the physical conditions of life. And variations in this sense are supposed not to be inherited. But who can say that the dwarfed condition of shells in the brackish waters of the Baltic, or dwarfed plants of an alpine summits, or the thicker fur of an animal from far northwards, would not in some cases be inherited for at least some few generations, and in this case I presume that the form would be called a variety. Again, we have many slight differences which may be called individual differences. Such are known frequently to appear in the offspring from the same parents, or which may be presumed to have thus arisen from being frequently observed in the individuals of the same species, inhabiting the same confined locality. No one supposes that all the individuals of the same species are cast in the very same mold. These individual differences are highly important for us, as they afford materials for natural selection to accumulate. In the same manner as man can accumulate in any given direction individual differences in his domesticated productions, these individual differences generally affect what naturalists consider unimportant parts. But I could show by a long catalogue of facts that parts which must be called important, whether viewed under a physiological or classificatory point of view, sometimes vary in the individuals of the same species. I am convinced that the most experienced naturalist would be surprised at the number of cases of variability, even in important parts of structure, which he could collect on good authority, as I have collected during a course of years. It should be remembered that systematists are far from pleased at finding variability in important characters, and that there are not many men who will laboriously examine internal and important organs, and compare them in many specimens of the same species. I should never have expected that the branching of the main nerves close to the great central ganglion of an insect would have been variable in the same species. I should have expected that change of this nature could have been effected only by slow degrees, yet quite recently Mr. Lubbock has shown a degree of variability in these main nerves in coccus, which may almost be compared to the irregular branching of the stem of a tree. This philosophical naturalist, I may add, has also quite recently shown that the muscles in the larvae of certain insects are very far from uniform. Authors sometimes argue in a circle when they state that important organs never vary, for these same authors practically rank that a character is important as some few naturalists have honestly confessed, which does not vary. And under this point of view, no instance of an important part varying will ever be found. But under any other point of view, many insects assuredly can be given. There is one point connected with individual differences, which seems to be, to me, extremely perplexing. I refer to those genera which have sometimes been called protean, or polymorphic, in which sorry, I just had a stream flutter. In which the species present an inordinate amount of variation, and hardly two naturalists can agree which forms to rank a species and which as varieties. We may instance rubus, rosa, and Heraceium among plants, several genera of insects, and several genera of brachiopod shells. In most polymorphic genera, some of the species have fixed and definite characters. Genera which are polymorphic in one country seem to be, with some few exceptions, polymorphic in other countries. And likewise, judging from brachiopod shells, at former periods of time, these facts seem to be very perplexing, for they seem to show that this kind of variability is independent of the conditions of life. I am inclined to suspect that we see in these polymorphic genre variations in points of structure which are of no service or disservice to the species, and which consequently have not been seized on and rendered definitely by natural selection, as hereafter will be explained. Those forms which possess in some considerable degree the character of species, but which are so closely similar to some other forms, or are so closely linked to them by intermediate gradations, that naturalists do not like to rank them as distinct species, are in several respects the most important for us. They have every reason to believe that many of these doubtful and closely allied forms have permanently retained their characters in their own country for a long time, for as long, as far as we know, as have good and true species. Practically, when a naturalist can unite two forms together by others having intermediate characters, he treats the one as a variety and the other maketh the most common. But sometimes, the one first described as the species and the others as the variety. But cases of great difficulty, which I will not here enumerate, sometimes occur in deciding whether or not to rank one form as a variety of another, even when they are closely connected by intermediate links. Nor will the commonly assumed hybrid nature of the intermediate links always remove the difficulty. In very many cases, however, one form is ranked as a variety of another, not because the intermediate links have actually been found, but because analogy leads the observer to suppose either that they do now somewhere exist, or may formerly have existed, and here a wide door for this entry of doubt and conjecture is opened. Hence, in determining whether a form should be ranked as a species or a variety, the opinion of naturalists having sound judgment and wide experience seems the only guide to follow. We must, however, in many cases, decide by a majority of naturalists, for few well-marked and well-known varieties can be named, which have not been ranked as species by at least some competent judges. The varieties of this doubtful nature are far from uncommon, and cannot be disputed. Compare the several floras of Great Britain, of France, or of the United States, drawn up by different botanists, and see what a surprising number of forms have been ranked by one botanist as a good species, and by another as mere varieties. Mr. H.C. Watson, to whom I lie under deep obligation for assistance of all kinds, has marked for me 182 British plants, which are generally considered as varieties, but which have all been ranked by botanists as species, and in making this list, he has omitted many trifling varieties, but which nevertheless have been ranked by some botanists as species, and he has entirely omitted several highly polymorphic genera, under genre including the most polymorphic forms. Mr. Babington gives 251 species, whereas Mr. Bentham only 112, a difference of 139 doubtful forms. Amongst animals which unite for each birth and which are highly locomotive, doubtful forms ranked by one zoologist as a species and by another as a variety can rarely be found within the same country, but are common in separated areas. How many of those birds and insects in North America and Europe, which differ very slightly from each other, have been ranked by one eminent naturalist as undoubted species and by another as varieties, or, as they are often called, as geographical races. Many years ago, when comparing seeing others compare the birds from the separate islands of Galapagos archipelago, both one with another and with those of the American mainland, I was much struck how entirely vague and arbitrary is this distinction between species and varieties. On the islets of the little Madeira group, where there are many insects which are characterized as varieties in Mr. Wollaston's admirable work, but which it cannot be doubted would be ranked as distinct species by many entomologists. Even Ireland has a few animals, now generally regarded as varieties, but which have been ranked as species by some zoologists. Several most experienced ornithologists consider our British red grouse as only a strongly marked race of our Norwegian species, whereas the greater number rank it as an undoubtful species peculiar to Great Britain. Wide distance between the homes of two doubtful forms leads many naturalists to rank both as different species. But what distance, has been well asked, will suffice? If that between America and Europe is ample, will that between the continent of Azores or Madeira, or the Canaries or Ireland be sufficient? It must be admitted that many forms, considered by highly competent judges as varieties, have so perfectly the character of species that they are ranked by other highly competent judges as good and true species. But to discuss whether they are rightly called species or varieties before any definition of those terms has been generally accepted is vainly to beat the air. Many of the cases of strongly marked varieties for doubtful species will deserve consideration, for several interesting lines of argument, from geographical distribution, phonological variation, hybridism, etc., have been brought to bear on the attempt to determine their rank. I will here give only a single instance, the well-known one of the primrose and cowslip, or Primulae vulgaris and veris. These plants differ considered in appearance. They have a different flavor and emit a different odor. They flower at slightly different periods. They grow in somewhat different stations. They ascended mountains to different heights. They have different geographical ranges. And lastly, according to very numerous experiments made during several years by that most careful observer Gardner, they can be crossed only with much difficulty. We could hardly wish for better evidence of two forms being specifically distinct. On the other hand, they are united by many intermediate links, and it is very doubtful whether these links are hybrids, and there is, as it seems to me, an overwhelming amount of experimental evidence showing that they descend from common parent and consequently must be ranked as varieties. Close investigation, in most cases, will bring naturalists to an agreement how to rank doubtful forms. Yet it must be confessed that it is the best known countries that we find the greatest number of forms of doubtful value. I have been struck with the fact that if any animal or plant in a state of nature be highly useful to man, or from any cause closely attract his attention, varieties of it will almost universally be found recorded. These varieties, moreover, will be often ranked by some other authors as species. Look at the common oak, how closely it has been studied. Yet a German author makes more than a dozen species out of forms, which are very generally considered as varieties. And in this country, the highest botanical authorities and practical men can be quoted to show that the sessile and pedunculated oaks are either good and distinct species or mere varieties. When a young naturalist commences the study of a group of organisms quite unknown to him, he is at first much perplexed to determine what differences to consider as specific and what as varieties, for he knows nothing of the amount of kind of variation to which the group is subject, and this shows, at least, how very generally there is some variation. But if he confine his attention to one class within one country, he will soon make up his mind how to rank most of the doubtful forms. His general tendency will be to make many species, for he will become impressed, just like the pigeon or poultry fancier before alluded to, with the amount of difference in the forms, which he is continually studying. He has little general knowledge of analogical variation in other groups and in other countries, by which to correct his first impressions as he extends the range of his observations, he will meet with more cases of difficulty, where he will encounter a greater number of closely allied forms. But if his observations be widely extended, he will, in the end, generally be enabled to make up some on which to call varieties and which species. But he will succeed in this at the expense of admitting much variation, and the truth of this admission will often be disputed by other naturalists. When, moreover, he comes to study allied forms brought from countries now continuous, in which case he can hardly hope to find the intermediate links between his doubtful forms, he will have to trust almost entirely to analogy, and his difficulties rise to a climax. Certainly no clear line of demarcation has yet been drawn between species and subspecies, that is, the forms which, in the opinion of some naturalists, come very near to, but do not quite arrive at the rank of species, or again, between subspecies and well-marked varieties, or between lesser varieties and individual differences. These differences blend into each other in a sensible series, and a series impresses the mind with an idea of an actual passage. I'm just gonna unmute. Yeah, I was just adjusting the camera there. So, I know the detail with which Darwin gets in his description is quite thorough, and I believe that is part of the reason that his work has been received with such immense catalyzation of other impacts. So, in this section, we finish up on domestication. We get to natural variation, and it's mostly a discussion of variation. He hasn't gotten to natural selection quite yet, and he's very thoroughly explaining the variety and the difficulty there is in determining variations in species. So that's that interesting point to make. With the exercise I'm doing, I get the feeling, due to the depth of it, I might stray a little bit away from the source material, reading it, and the discussion. But I'm going to try and take point of the notes. So do you distinguish call human created or natural human structures that exist? It's like Christianity would be similar to the species, and the different versions of Christianity would be the variations. But even if you get into Catholicism itself has variations within it. Eastern and Western, and there's so much variety that you would be able to recognize them. And some different Catholic churches could be so different you might rate them as different as the Catholic Church, or the Alliance Church and the Baptist Church. So there's a significant amount of that really deep variability in our structures, and many people might even fail to recognize the variation. It's like just because there are trends in a group doesn't mean you can treat every member of that group as bad or good, or say that not every member of a group is. There's phenomenology and anthropology. You have group trends for whatever group you're analyzing, but the outliers' rights still need to be recognized. So you don't treat if you treat everyone who's a member of that group properly and politely, they will sort themselves out and fit that bell curve. But if you prejudge them based on the group mean, group trend, and because some other people of that group, you're going to do a disservice and treat the outliers immorally. It's the this so the variation needs to be recognized and acknowledged. There is species variation and varieties and race variation in and the different variations are peculiar forms. For governments, we have many different democracies, and what can be called we might recognize them as completely separate forms of government in some cases. It's like the form of democracy that they have in Britain is very different from the form they have in the United States. It's a monarchist democracy, and the difference might be greater than the difference between the government of the United States, which is a democracy, a democratic republic, and a republic, a representative republic. There might be more similarities in that sense. So there's a significant amount of variability in our naturally occurring human structures, not our man-made ones, because we select for some variability in the man-made ones. So government is a natural phenomenon. Corporations are a human-made. I mean, they've evolved over time, and yes, they're like a domesticated natural phenomena. A corporation operates very similar to a government, but a government definitely has. I mean, there is there is forces at play to manipulate governance as well. So it's like if you were to go out to the bush and decided you wanted to try and affect the natural wildlife in a certain way. Perhaps you want, like the Chinese, altering the wild stock of tuna to be massive. So now there's massive tuna in the ocean. There's similar impacts on governments from lobby groups, and I would say it's far more. Religions, different religions, you might be able to demark separations within the religion as if they are different religions, different natural phenomena. What other? Our stories and our schools vary quite a bit. They've been definitely brought under heat, and they're definitely more of the domesticated variety type organization than a wild stock, because they used to be a wild stock, but like at this point they look like they are so centrally controlled and organized and created to operate exactly the same as each other. There's no variety or independent human faculty of reason being brought in. It's all dictated. It's very, very centralized to the point that it's like you had a dog and you bred it with its siblings, like the Chihuahua factories you hear about, until you get these brutally disgusting, monstrous defects in it because of all the inbreeding, and I would say that's probably what's happened with our schools. Bottom up, not as much at the top yet, but it's getting there. It's an emergent phenomena that's happening everywhere in our schools. What else for varieties? It's hard to process through my filters like this in this way. What do we have as structures? Even for our militaries, even within the Army, you could call the different branches of the Army and the Navy, but they're still distinct species from police force, firefighting force, or like there's specific based differences and then variation within those specific variations, and then there's the race differences, the differences of that are specific varieties. So you have your army with Marines, and then the different version of Marines for different countries. The different would be like the races. So you have your variety within the species and your races below that. At least that's how I'm coming to understand it from Darwin's work. I could be wrong. I'm often wrong. Often wrong's nickname I have online. It's my go-to now. Often wrong is what I call myself on Discord. You want to add me if there happens to be a viewer anywhere. Alright, let's get to the next topic. I know it's a little early, but I woke up late today and I'm kind of feeling tired. Wait. And this one is The Causes of Corrupt Eloquence by Publius Cornelius Tacitus, chapter 34, or 10 and 10 and 10 and 1 from 5, as Romans would, that's how you read that, 10 and 10 and 10 and 1 from 5. You have to add it up. It's very, considering how forward they were, they didn't quite get that, did they? The practice of our ancestors was agreeable to this theory. Oh yeah, where were we? Duly prepared for the study of eloquence. That he, who with a fund of previous knowledge undertakes the province of warfare, will find him well with him. Okay. The practice of our ancestors was agreeable to this theory. The youth, who was intended for public declamation, went forth, under the care of his father or some near relation, with all the advantages of home discipline. His mind was expanded by the fine arts, and impregnated with science. He was conducted to the most eminent orator of the time. Under that illustrious patronage, he visited the forum, he attended the patron upon all occasions, he listened with attention to his pleadings in the tribunals of justice, and his public hearings before the people. He heard him in the warmth of argument. He noted his sudden replies, and thus, in the field of battle, if I may so express myself, he learned the first rudiments of rhetorical warfare. The advantages of this method are obvious. The young candidate gained courage and improved his judgment. He studied in open day, amidst the heat of the conflict, where nothing weak or idle could be said with impunity, where everything absurd was instantly rebuked by the judge, exposed to ridicule by the adversary, and condemned by the whole bar. In this manner the student was initiated in the rules of sound and manly eloquence, and, though it be true that he placed himself under the auspices of one orator only, he heard the rest of in their turn. And in that diversity of tastes which always prevails in mixed assemblies, he was enabled to distinguish what was excellent or defective in the kind. The orator in actual business was the best preceptor. The instructions which he gave were living eloquence, the substance, and not the shadow. He was himself a real combatant, engaged with a zealous antagonist, both in earnest and not like gladiators in a mock contest fighting for prizes. It was a struggle for victory, before an audience always changing, yet always full, where the speaker had his enemies as well as his admirers, and between both, what was brilliant met with applause, what was defective was sure to be condemned. In this clash of opinions, the genuine orator flourished, and acquired that lasting fame which we all know does not depend on the voice of friends only, but must rebound from the benches filled with your enemies. Extorted applause is the best suffrage. In that school, the youth of expectation, such as I have delineated, was reared and educated by the most eminent genius of the times. In the forum, he was enlightened by the experience of others. He was instructed in the knowledge of laws, accustomed to the eye of the judges, habituated to the looks of a numerous audience, and acquainted with a popular taste. After this preparation, he was called forth to conduct the prosecution, or to take upon himself the whole weight of the defense. The fruit of his application was then seen at once. He was equal, in his first outset, to the most arduous business. Thus it was that Crassus, at the age of 19, stood forth the accuser of Papirius Carbo. Thus Julius Caesar, at 21, arranged Dolabella, Asinius Pollio, about the same age, attacked Cassius Cato, and Calvus, but a little older, flamed out against Vatinius. Their several speeches are still extant, and we all read them with admiration. In opposition to this system of education, what is our modern practice? Our young men are led to academical prolusions in a school of vain professors who call themselves rhetoricians, a race of impostors who made their first appearance at Rome not long before the days of Cicero. That they were unwelcome visitors is evident from the circumstances of their being silenced by the two censors, Crassus and Domitius. They were ordered, says Cicero, to shut up their school of impudence. Those scenes, however, are open at present, and our young students listen to Mountebank oratory. I am at a loss how to determine which is most fatal to all true genius, the place itself, the company that frequent it, or the plan of study universally adopted. Can the place impress the mind with awe and respect, where none are ever seen but the raw, the unskilful, and the ignorant? In such assembly, what advantage can arise? Boys harangue before boys, and young men exhibit before their fellows. The speaker is pleased with his declamation, and the hearer with his judgment. The very subjects on which they display their talents tend to no useful purpose. They are of two sorts, persuasive or controversial. The first, supposed to be of the lighter kind, are usually assigned to the youngest scholars. The last are reserved for students of longer practice and ripened judgment. But gracious powers, what are the compositions produced on these occasions? The subject is remote from truth, and even probability, unlike anything that ever happened in human life, and no wonder if the superstructure perfectly agrees with the foundation. It is to these scenic exercises that we owe a number of frivolous topics, such as the reward due to the slayer of a tyrant, the election made by violated virgins, the rites and ceremonies proper to be used during a raging pestilence, and the loose behavior of married women, with other fictitious subjects hackneyed at in the schools, and seldom or never heard of in our courts of judges. These imaginary questions are treated with gaudy flourishes and all the tumor of unnatural language. But after all this mighty parade, they call these striplings from their schools of rhetoric into the presence of the judges and to the real business of the bar. What figure will they make before the solemn justiciar? Trained up in chimerical exercises, strangers to the municipal laws, unacquainted with the principles of natural justice and the rights of nations, they will bring with them the false taste which they have been for years acquiring, but nothing worthy of the public ear, nothing useful to their clients. They have succeeded in nothing but the art of making themselves ridiculous. The peculiar quality of their teacher, whatever it be, is sure to transfuse itself into the performance of the pupil. Is the master haughty, fierce, and arrogant? The scholar swells with confidence. His eye threatens prodigious things, and his harangue is an ostentatious display of the commonplaces of school oratory, dressed up with dazzling splendor and thundered forth with emphasis. On the other hand, does the master value himself for the delicacy of his taste, for the foppery of glittering conceits and tinsel ornament? The youth who has been educated under him sets out with the same artificial prettiness, the same foppery of style and manner. The simper plays on his countenance. His elocution is soft and delicate, his action aesthetic, his sentences entangled in a maze of sweet perplexity. He plays off the whole of his theatrical skill and hopes to elevate and surprise. This love of finery, this ambition to shine and glitter, has destroyed all true eloquence. Oratory is not the child of hireling teachers. It springs from another source, from a love of liberty, from a mind replete with moral science, and through a knowledge of the laws, from a due respect for the best examples of profound meditation, and a style formed by constant practice. While these were thought essential requisites, eloquence flourished. But the true beauties of language fell into disuse, and oratory went to ruin. The spirit evaporated. I fear to revive no more. I wish I may prove a false prophet, but we know the progress of art in every age and country. Rude at first, it rises from low beginnings, and goes on improving, till it reaches its highest perfection in the kind. But at that point, it is never stationary. It soon declines from the corrosion of what is good. It is not the nature of man, nor the power of human faculties, to rise again to the same degree of excellence. Messala closed with the degree of vehemence, and then turning to Maternus and Secundus, "It is yours," he said, "to pursue this train of argument, or if any cause of the decay of eloquence lies still deeper, you will oblige us to bring it to light. Maternus, I presume, will find no difficulty. Poetic genius holds commerce with the gods, and to him nothing will remain a secret. As for Secundus, he has been a long shining ornament of the forum, and by his own experience knows how to distinguish genuine eloquence from the corrupt and vicious." Maternus heard this sally of his friend's good humor with a smile. "The task," he said, "which you have imposed upon me, we will endeavor to execute. But though I am an interpreter of the gods, I must notwithstanding request that Secundus may take the lead. He is master of the subject, and, in questions of this kind, experience is better than inspiration." Secundus complied with his friend's request. "I yield," he said, "the more willingly as I shall hazard no new opinion, but rather confirm what has been urged by Messala. It is certain that, as painters are formed by painters and poets by example of poets, so the young orator must learn his art from orators only. In the schools of rhetoricians, who think themselves the fountainhead of eloquence, everything is false and vitiated. The true principles of the persuasive art are never known to the professor, or if at any time there may be found a preceptor of superior genius, can it be expected that he shall be able to transfuse into the mind of his pupil all the known conceptions, pure, unmixed, and free from error? The sensibility of the master, since we have allowed him genius, will be an impediment. The uniformity of the same dull, tedious round will give him disgust, and the student will turn from it with aversion. And yet I am inclined to think that the decay of eloquence would not have been so rapid if other causes, more fatal than the corruption of the schools, had not cooperated. When the worst models became the objects of imitation, and not only the young men of the age, but even the whole body of the people admired the new way of speaking, eloquence fell at once into the state of degeneracy, from which nothing can recover it. We who came afterwards, found ourselves in a hopeless situation. We were driven to wretched expedients, to forced conceits, and the glitter of frivolous sentences. We were obliged to hunt after wit, when we could no longer be eloquent. But what pernicious examples this was accomplished has been explained by our friend Messala. We are none of us strangers to those unhappy times, when Rome, grown weary of her vast renown in arms, began to think of striking into new paths of fame, no longer willing to depend on the glory of her ancestors. The whole power of the state was centered in a single ruler, and by the policy of the prince men were taught to think no more of ancient honor. Invention was on the stretch for novelty, and all looked for something better than perfection, something rare, far-fetched, and exquisite. New modes of pleasure were devised. In that period of luxury and dissipation, when the rage for new inventions was grown epidemic, Seneca arose. His talents were of a peculiar sort, acute, refined, and polished, but polished to a degree that made him prefer affectation, and wit to truth and nature. The predominance of his genius was great, and, by consequence, he gave the mortal stab to all true eloquence. When I say this, let me not be suspected of that low malignity which would tarnish the fame of a great character. I admire the man, and the philosopher. The undaunted firmness with which he braved the tyrant's frown will do immortal honor in his memory. But the fact is, and why should I disguise it, the virtues of the writer have undone his country. To bring about this unhappy revolution, no man has so eminently qualified. His understanding was large and comprehensive, his genius rich and powerful, his way of thinking ingenious, elegant, and even charming. His researches in moral philosophy excited the admiration of all, and moral philosophy is never so highly praised as when the manners are in a state of degeneracy. Seneca knew the taste of the times. He had the art to gratify the public ear. His style is neat, yet animated, concise, yet clear, familiar, yet seldom inelegant, free from redundancy, and his periods are often abrupt. But they surprise with the vivacity. He shines in pointed sentences, and that unceasing persecution of vice, which is kept up with the uncommon ardor, spreads a luster over all his writings. His brilliant style, charmed by its novelty, every page sparkles with wit, with gay allusions and sentiments of virtue. No wonder that the graceful ease and sometimes the dignity of his expression made their way into the forum. What pleased universally soon found a number of imitators, and, to add to this the advantages of rank and honor, he mixed in the splendor and perhaps the vices of the court. The resentment of Caligula and the acts of oppression which soon after followed served only to adorn his name, to crown all. Nero was his pupil and his murderer. Hence the character of and genius of the man rose to the highest eminence. What was admired was imitated, and true oratory was heard no more. The love of novelty prevailed, and for the dignified simplicity of ancient eloquence no taste remained. The art itself, and all its necessary discipline, became ridiculous. And that black period when vice triumphed at large and virtue had everything to fear, the temper of the times was propitious to the corrupters of taste and liberal science. The dignity of composition was no longer of use, and no power to stop the torrent of vice which deluged the city of Rome, and virtue found it a feeble protection. In such a conjuncture it was not safe to speak the sentiments of the heart. To be obscure, abrupt, and dark was the best expedient. Then it was that the affected sententious brevity came into vogue. To speak concisely and with an air of precipitation was the general practice. To work the ruin of a person accused, a single sentence or a splendid phrase was sufficient. Men defended themselves in a short, brilliant expression, and if that did not protect them, they died with a lively apophthegm, and their last words were wit. This was the fashion introduced by Seneca. The peculiar but agreeable vices of his style wrought the downfall of eloquence. The solid was exchanged for the brilliant, and they who ceased to be orators studied to be ingenious. Of late, indeed, we have seen the draw of better times. In the course of the last 6 years, Vespasian has revived our hopes. The friend of regular manners and the encourager of ancient virtue, by which Rome was raised to the highest principle of glory, he has restored the public peace, and with it the blessings of liberty. Under his propitious influence, the arts and sciences began once more to flourish, and genius has been honored with his munificence. The example of his sons has helped to kindle a spirit of emulation. We beheld with pleasure the two princes adding to the dignity of their rank, and their fame in arms, all the grace and elegance of polite literature. But it is fatally true that when the public taste is once corrupted, the mind which has been warped seldom recovers its former tone. This difficulty was rendered still more insurmountable by the licentious spirit of our young men, and the popular applause that encouraged the false taste of the times. I need not, in this company, call to mind the unbridled presumption with which, as soon as genuine eloquence expired, the young men of the age took possession of the forum. Of modest birth and ancient manners nothing remained. We know that in former times a youthful candidate was introduced in the forum by a person of consular rank, and by him set forward in his road to fame. That laudable custom being at an end, all fences were thrown down, no sense of shame remained, no respect for the tribunals of justice. The aspiring genius wanted no patronage. He scorned the usual forms of regular introduction, and, with full confidence in his own powers, he obtruded himself on the court. Neither the solemnity of the place, nor the sanctity of laws, nor the importance of the oratorical character should restrain the impetuosity of young ambition. unconscious of the importance of the undertaking, and less sensible of his own incapacity, the bold adventurer rushed at once into the most arduous business arrogance supplied the place of talents. I'm going to pause this early. Oh, that's rich. That's what I'm. Yeah. So it looks like a lot of it is coming from the centralization and efforts to garner power and with less traditional methods. So this idea earlier on today was of you would be trained up by somebody specifically and you'd learn from them, and that's been replaced by a school of rhetoricians. And I see that in the sciences and everywhere. Traditionally in school you studied law, theology, or medicine. So the schools have taken over every field, and we've seen a corruption of every field. It's like if you try and standardize things, then people work towards that standard, or they don't work to add anything more than that. You don't, if there's no, the teachers have too many pupils, they can't teach the pupil more than the technical details. They can't teach them the valuable habits and traditions. You don't go home with your teacher, and you don't live with, well, you would spend your time with them while they worked, right? And you learn through practice a little bit, or watching the practice, whereas now you sit and listen, and I just see that corruption in everything now. Everything. It's like, it never even occurred to me. I didn't remember that piece before. And it was, wow. And corruption of brilliant characters who, it's like Nietzsche. I see a lot of his genius, and I really do see it, but he was corrupted in so many ways, and it comes out. And because of how smart he was able to convince a lot of people his ideas and the value of his ideas. So when you're communicating with people, you don't learn by classroom, you learn by example. And it's the next, I know it's the next one, but it's the company you keep. If you find somebody if you meet people who are good at asking, try and spend time with them and just be exposed to it, be used to it, practice it, rather than trying to read a book about how to convince people of things. A lot more of it is being exposed to it. It's like, if you want to learn to sell things, I think I was on a program called Letterkenny. They made a joke about one of those reality TV shows like Pickers or Pawn Stars or something, and it was just, the joke was the way you buy and sell things and the way you haggle and dicker. And it's like, yeah, you don't learn dickering from a book per se. You learn it from practice and observation. So you're better to watch Pawn Stars because then you've got that, and pay attention to how they are dickering, right? It's definitely, I like some of these shows to a degree, but practice it, buy and sell things. Even if you're losing, eventually you get good. You want to, that's another thing with minimum wage, for example. All things, you got to start somewhere. Whatever the part of the issue with schools is, they teach you and then they send you out with no skills. They teach you technical details, and then you have to learn the skills on site. Or, I mean, some schools are better than others, but by and large, most of it sit and listen. And I mean, fair enough. There's a level of information you need to be able to input and re-output. So, but if you want to learn something and you want to work at it,
you're not going to be good at it until you get good at it. You have to start bad and work towards good. And no one wants to be bad at something. So no one takes on buying and selling things. It's like super. I've done it with Bitcoin and I quite enjoyed it, but I didn't feel like I was providing value. I'm tempted to get back into Bitcoin, to be honest. And it's if you practice it, practice asking, practice leading. For example, leading is pay attention to the group, pay attention to the principles. We'll get to Robert's Rules of Order probably, an old version of it. I want to buy a new version, but I don't think it'd be open source, so I wouldn't be able to do this with it. But we'll buy an old version, so pay attention to something. Second, there's a leg, lead, pace. So you mirror somebody, you pace them, and then you lead. So if you see somebody, if you just get in a group, hang out, if you see somebody, for example, decide to go play pool, leg, go, ask them for a game, right? If you're in the group. Once you're playing, now you've got the lead, and then take whatever it was you wanted originally to do, or let's get food, say. Like, sacrifice a little bit of your time. Plan ahead, maybe, is I guess what the point of that is what I'm saying. There's planning ahead. Plan ahead with the idea of sacrifice. So people read a lot from each other, and yeah, it's a finding a person to emulate and learning from them, specifically learning from them, their instruction, the etiquette, the tradition, all the sciences. And most of the science of history has been citizen scientists and patrons wealthy people who paid those people, just giving them money to help them do their work just out of the love of science. So it's not government that solves all your problems. And today we've become extremely dependent on government and state and centralization. And it's corruption. I guess I'm extracting from this the way with corruption seeps. And I like the cyclical analogy, or the cyclical point made. Once the arts get to a certain point, they corrupt and die, and then you can't go back. So there's a natural cycle, and in Plato's Republic, I guess I have to do Plato's Republic at some point. Maybe when I get this stream long enough, I'll do Plato's Republic in it. So once I'm worried about making this stream too long because I had an original idea, but I'm not marketing it properly, so it's more of a frivolous effort and for me I'm reading, that's not bad, right? I need to start editing and marketing. Sorry, that was a side note, that's unrelated. So anyway, there's cycles, and you build something up to a point that it starts to collapse, and once a ball is rolling downhill, you have to just watch it hit the bottom before you start pushing it back up. I guess that's a rough mythopoetic. What's his name? It's not Atlas. It's who pushes the stone up the hill. My memory is not the best. Well, it's a Greek story. You're constantly pushing up the stone up the hill. Yeah. So. So you want to be careful about corruption, and part of it comes from being well prepared with knowledge. It's a science you have to test assess. Knowledge itself is power. Have all the knowledge of for example, they said they're being sent out not knowing the laws. Well, if you're going to be a lawyer, you need to study the laws, right? But a lot of it is, or if you're going to be a politician, I think an orator is a more on a parliamentary side of law. I'm not certain. I really should look it up. They mentioned lawyers and orators separate earlier, and that's thrown me off because I thought orators were essentially lawyers. But in any case, the sciences and a good foundation of self is and understanding of the world and understanding a little bit about history. If you have all that, you will be able to communicate effectively, and you will command attention, and you will command people in a much more respectable fashion. I suppose I'm having a thought here that this is a frivolous activity, but I am refining my own thoughts for myself. I'm getting close to a point where I need to start producing content that I can live off of, type thing. Okay. Oh. Yes. Good usage has given the lady the privilege of determining whether she will recognize the gentleman after the introduction. It is therefore her place to make the recognition first, by a slight bow. The gentleman is bound to return her recognition in the same manner. When passing a lady on the street, it is not enough for the gentleman to merely touch his hat. He should lift it from his head. Did I go too far back last time? I guess we'll find out, right? The cut is given by continued stare at a person. This can only be justified at all by extraordinary and notoriously bad conduct on the part of the one cut. Cut is given by continued stare at a person for the one cut, and it is very seldom called for. Should anyone desire to avoid a bowing acquaintance with another, it may be done by turning aside or dropping the eyes. Good society will not allow a gentleman to give a lady the cut under any circumstances. Yet there may be circumstances in which he would be excused for persisting in not meeting her eyes, for should their eyes meet, he must bow, even though she fail to grant him a decided recognition. An introduction should never be given on the street unless it be strictly a matter of business or an emergency not to be avoided. If, when walking with a friend on the street, one should meet an acquaintance and stop a moment to speak with him, it is unnecessary to introduce the two who are strangers. But on separating, the friend who is with you gives a parting salutation the same as yourself. This rule is applicable to both ladies and gentlemen. Introductions of oneself. If, when entering a reception room to pay a visit, you should not be recognized, mention your name at once. If you happen to know one member of the family and you find others only in the room, make yourself known to them. If this is not done, much embarrassment and awkwardness may be the result. You should mention your name in an easy, self-possessed way, and ask for the member of the family with whom you are acquainted. When an introduction takes place between a lady and a gentleman, she should merely bow and not offer to shake hands unless the gentleman is an intimate acquaintance of some member of the family. In case the gentleman is a well-known friend, she may give him her hand in token of esteem and respect. A gentleman must not offer his hand to a lady unless she has made the first movement. A married lady should offer her hand on being introduced to a stranger in her own house, especially if he has been brought to the house by her husband or by a mutual friend. Such an act on her part
is indicative of a cordiality which shows the stranger that he is welcome and may enjoy her hospitality in good faith. While much discretion must be used on the part of ladies in shaking hands with gentlemen, it nevertheless shows a good spirit, and where the surroundings are as they should be, no danger is likely to arise from the custom. Gentlemen, almost inadvertently, shake hands with each other on being introduced. In this case, the elder of the two, or the superior in the social standing, should make the first movement in offering to shake hands. Gentlemen, in shaking hands with ladies, or with each other, should be careful not to grip the hand too closely. This often inflicts pains and shows anything else but good breeding. Much care should be exercised in the granting of letters of introduction. These should be given only to intimate friends, and addressed to one with whom the writer has a strong physical friendship. It is both foolish and dangerous to give such a letter to one with whom the writer is but slightly acquainted. But so doing, he may not only place himself, but also the one whom the letter is addressed, in a very mortifying position. The author of such a letter should not only be confident as to the integrity of the one introduced, but he should be equally well assured that such an acquaintance will be agreeable to the one whom the letter is addressed. In general, such letters should be given very cautiously and sparingly. The reader will find the form of such letters in the chapter on letter writing. Delivering letters of introduction. It is not generally best for the bearer of a letter of introduction to deliver it in person. The better plan is, on arriving in place of the residence of the party addressed, to send a letter to him accompanied with your own card of address. If he desires to comply with the wish of his friend, he will at once call upon you. Circumstances are such that he cannot call upon you. He will send you his card of address, and you may call upon him at your leisure. Duty of a person addressed. In Europe, a person bearing a letter of introduction makes the first call. In this county, we are of the opinion that the stranger should not be made to feel that he is begging our attention. Therefore, if it is your wish and in your power, you should welcome at once, and in a cordial way, the one bearing a letter of introduction, addressed to yourself. Call upon him as soon as you receive his letter of introduction, and accord to him such treatment as you would be pleased to receive were you in his place. Letters of introduction for business purposes often pass between businessmen. Etiquette does not require the receiver to entertain the bearer as a friend. The conduct of each should be gentlemanly, but the obligation of such a letter ceases with the transaction of the business in hand. However, if the acquaintance proves mutually agreeable, such a letter may be as the basis of a real and lasting friendship. Just loading. Chapter 8. Salutations and greetings, the kinds of salutations. Nothing so quickly or effectually indicates the well-bred person as the way in which he recognizes his fellow men on the street and in various other places. Salutations and greetings, in themselves, furnish a basis upon which to found all other matters of etiquette. It would be interesting and profitable to reveal the history which lies hidden under the simple yes ma'am and no sir of today. Also, to present the forms of salutation used among various nations of the earth. We must content ourselves, however, only with intimating these portions of the topic, and proceeding at once to that which is practical and useful to the lady or the gentleman of today. In England and America, the bow, the handshake, and the kiss constitute the accepted modes of salutation. The bow. This mode of salutation is the one most generally used, and it is made to include quite a number of motions which themselves are not bows, and yet custom has made them to take the place of graceful bend of the body which we call a bow. Between gentlemen, a slight inclination of the head, a wave of the hand, or a mere touch of the hat is sufficient. Bowing to a lady, the hat must be lifted from the head, but custom has made it permissible to touch the hat at the same time slightly inclining the head. If the gentleman is smoking, he takes a cigar from his mouth before lifting the hat, or if he has his hand in his pocket, he removes it. If you know people slightly, you recognize them with some reserve. If you know them well, use more familiarity in your salutation. At the first meeting of the eyes, the bow should be given. The bow is the one mark of good breeding,
and it must never be omitted, even to one with whom you may have had a misunderstanding. As this shows an civility which cannot be countenanced by good manners. Always return a bow, even though you do not recognize the person who makes it, because he either knows you or has mistaken you for someone else, and to neglect it would be to show yourself wanting in that which the great difference between the ill-bred and the well-bred person. Salutation of the young to the old. An introduction always entitles one to recognition, and it is the duty of the younger person to make himself known to the elder. He should do this by bowing. He should continue this until the recognition becomes mutual. There are two good reasons for this practice. First, older people have larger circles of acquaintances, and they do not always remember younger persons to whom they may have been introduced. Second, older people are apt to forget the faces of young people and thus fail to recognize them. Owing to these facts, elderly people usually wait for the young to recognize them before bowing, and this should always be done, for it shows good breeding and respect for age. Avoidance of recognition. If a bowing acquaintance is not desired with one who has been properly introduced, it may be broken by looking aside or dropping the eyes as a person approaches, for should the eyes meet, the bow must be given. Bowing on promenades or in driving. Civility requires but a single bow to a person upon public promenade or in driving. If the individual is a friend, it is better with subsequent passings to smile slightly or exchange a word, should you catch his or her eye. In case of a mere acquaintance, it is best to avert the eyes. Words of greeting. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How do you do? Often shortened to howdy or howdy I do. And how are you are most commonly used in saluting a person. Of these, the first three are most appropriate unless you stop, when you may ask after another's health by using one of the last three words. It is polite for the eyes to express a smile, and these words are exchanged, but a broad grin should be avoided. A respectful bow should always accompany the words. Shaking hands. With friends, a shake of the hand is the most hearty and genuine expression of goodwill. The etiquette of shaking is simple. A man has no right to take a lady's hand until it is offered, and he has even less right to pinch or retain it. Two ladies shake hands gently and softly. A young lady gives her hand, but does not shake a gentleman's unless she is his friend. A lady should always rise to give her hand. A gentleman of course never dares to be seated. On introduction into a room, a married lady generally offers her hand. A young lady not. In a ballroom, handshaking is out of place, and in general, the more public the place, the less proper is handshaking. In case an introduction is accompanied with a personal recommendation, such as, I want you to know my friend Jones, or if Jones comes with a strong letter of introduction, you must give Jones your hand, and warmly too. Lastly, it is the privilege of a superior to give or withhold his hand, so that an inferior should never put his forward first. If a lady shakes hands with a gentleman, she should manifest frankly and cordiality. Equal frankness and goodwill should characterize the gentleman, but he must be careful as to undue familiarity or anything which might be construed as such. In shaking hands, the right hand should always be given. If that be impossible, an excuse should be offered. The French offer the left hand as nearest the heart, but it is considered bad taste to do so in this country. The mistress of a house should offer her hand to every guest invited to her house. This should be done especially when a stranger is brought into the house by a common friend, as evidence of her cordial welcome. The kiss. We have the kiss in the most affectionate form of salutation, and it is only proper among near relatives and dear friends. The kiss of friendship. The kiss of friendship and relationship is on the cheeks and forehead. This expression of affection, especially in this country, is usually excluded from the public, and, in the case of parents, children, and near relations, too much care is taken to conceal it. Kissing in public. The practice of women kissing each other in public is decidedly vulgar, and is avoided entirely by ladies of delicacy and true refinement. Okay, I need to start this chapter. Chapter 9. Conversation. Nothing can be more desirable than the ability to converse well.
not only to understand how to make a conversation interesting as to the subject and the way you treat it, but also to understand the properties that should characterize it. Nothing reveals one's character so much as his manner of conversation. Fight against it as we will, those with whom we converse freely know us better even than we know ourselves. It is, looking from a social point of view, the accomplishment of accomplishments. It is more desirable to talk well than to sing well or play well. Every intelligent person should acquire the habit of talking sensibly and with facility upon all topics of general interest to society. Clearly, may be both interested and interesting in the social circle. Those who have the true taste of conversation enjoy themselves in the communication of each other's excellencies, and not in a triumph over their imperfections. Conversation warms the mind, enlivens the imagination, and is continually starting fresh game that is immediately pursued and taking, which would never have occurred in the duller intercourse of epistolary correspondence, says Montaigne. It is good to rub and polish our brain against that of others. Before proceeding to the conversation of special topics, on this subject we will indulge in a few general reflections upon the art. In conversation, a great want of manners is shown in loud speaking, monopolizing the greater part of the conversation to yourself, or hinting at disagreeable topics. With respect to the latter habit, when ladies are present, all abstruse subjects and political discussions of party feeling should be avoided. The taste of ladies should always form criterion of discourse. Hence, the lighter and more varied the subjects of discussion are, and the more accessible they will be generally found. Again, one should be by all possible means avoid egotism, for nothing is more displeasing and disgusting. Never make yourself the hero or heroine of your own story. Do not attempt to find flight of language upon ordinary topics. To interrupt a person when speaking is the height of ill manners, and may justly cause indignation on the part of the one interrupted. Addressing conversation. Conversation is an art in which very few excel. How often at the dinner table or the drawing room is the harmony of an elegant and refined company broken by a malapropos observation of ill-timed discussion. Most men's failure in conversation is not due to a lack of wit or judgment, but a want of refinement or good breeding. So few know when to proceed and when to stop. This is an exact boundary beyond which an argument ought never be pressed. Speak to entertain rather than to distinguish yourself. If you have a favorite study or employment to which you are peculiarly devoted, you must remember not to obtrude it as a topic of conversation too far, for others may not be equally interested with yourself upon it. It certainly cannot be to our interest to expose our failings. Still less is it advisable to boast of our virtues. Avoid rudeness in speaking your mind upon questions which are matters of difference with people. This is exceedingly ill-timed and obtrusive. Many, under the pretext of speaking their mind, often disturb the harmony of social intercourse, and seem too obtuse to perceive it. We should avoid the impertinence of talking too much, and at the same time avoid running to the other extreme of talking too little. Seek to interest all without being offensive to any. Have the bearing and maintain the dignity of a lady or gentleman. To avoid that which you observe ill-timed in others, notice the address of those who are acknowledged as accomplished and refined, and make them your models. Cultivating memory. A good memory is an invaluable aid in acquiring the art of conversation. Hence, its training should be well looked to. Begin the training of this faculty early in life. When children hear a sermon or lecture, they should be required, when they come home, to tell all they can about it. Nothing improves a memory like practice. It is said that Henry Clay's popularity as a politician was due in great part to his faculty of remembering the names of persons he met. At night he would think over the names of all the persons he had met that day and write them down in a notebook. In the morning he would look them over and fix them in his mind, so that when he would afterward meet any of them, he could call them by name, and even tell the place and circumstance of the meeting. One is often thrown into embarrassment in society by a treacherous memory. At the very point of calling the name of an acquaintance whom you wish to introduce to another,
His name slips your memory, and you are then under the humiliating necessity of inquiring. In conversation, it is very desirable to be able to recall names, dates, and facts. Cultivate your memory. If it is a bad one, you can improve it, and the pleasure of having a ready memory will more than repay you for your trouble. Correct talking. To use correct language in conversation is another matter of very great importance. It is exceedingly unpleasant to hear the English language butchered by bad grammar and the misapplication of words. It is supposed that everyone has at least a rudimental education in the grammar of his language, and this is all that is necessary to correct talking. We learn to speak correctly by practice more than anything else. The writer is acquainted with a lady who never studied English grammar in her life, but she very rarely makes an error in conversation and never misapplies a term. She has always been in good society and has simply acquired the habit of speaking correctly from others. A mistake in grammar hurts her as much as it would the most accomplished grammarian. While it is necessary to have correct style, yet it should not be a stiff or stilted one. Requisites for a good talker. To be a good talker, then, requires that one should have much general information. This may be acquired by observation, by reading and study, attentive listening to others, and a correct knowledge of the use of language, as well as a discretion and refinement of address. One should also cultivate a clear intonation, well-chosen phraseology, and correct accent. True, many of these seem small requirements, but we must remember that it is the small things that make up the gentleman. Everyone should make the effort to possess them, and thus fit himself for the enjoyment of society. Vulgarisms. The use of vulgarisms in polite conversation betrays at once a coarseness that is disagreeable. Simplicity and purity of language are the characteristics of a well-educated and highly cultivated person. It is the uneducated and those who are only half-educated that use long words and high-sounding phrases. Anything like flippancy should be avoided. That disgustingly hyperbolical way of speaking, which essentially characterizes some young ladies, should be put aside. Such phrases as awfully nice, immensely jolly, abominably stupid, 100 others in common use, are high-sounding, meaningless phrases, and should never be used. Under this head also might come provincialisms, affectations of foreign accents, mannerisms, and slang, all of which are vulgarly out of place. Gentlemen should not address ladies in a flippant manner. Flippancy is as much an evidence of ill-breeding as a perpetual smile, the vacant stare, and the wandering eye. The habit of listening. To be a good listener requires as much cultivation as to be a good talker. In fact, listening is really as much a part of the conversation as talking. We should listen even when the one talking is prosy and uninteresting, and in appropriate periods of the conversation make such remarks as would show that we have read and understand all that has been said. We should always show the same courtesy to others that we expect from them ourselves, and hence we should not make an effort to be interested whether we are or not. We should make an effort to be interested whether we are or not. Okay. Okay, so conversation. I've got some terrible conversation habits. I've got introductions, bows, smiles. Maybe it's a product of the times we live in because I feel like I've got many really bad habits, and I really wanted to develop good etiquette. But I know at the very least I've got better etiquette than many. I've enjoyed being corrected by people I've managed to have the fortune of being in their counsel and company who do have excellent etiquette. Just know if my phone's recording funny. Maybe just make separate recordings of the hour marks, I don't know. So, yeah, you want to habit of listening. Listening, yes, this is very, very important. You truly want to clear your mind and hear what they say and only respond when the pause comes. You don't interrupt. It's hard. I've noticed on Discord because of the lag. It's really hard to not interrupt sometimes, and I know I can jump to it and get passionate, and I know I get too monopolistic conversation and too other things. So I know I've got a lot of bad habits here. So yeah, practice. Yeah, practice good habits, practice good etiquette, practice it. Practice, that's the key. I like the idea of remembering names I'm working on a project, but going through every night everyone you met that day and taking pains to remember all the details and whatnot. It's interesting, and I like that. So, yeah. I'm burnt out today. Woke up late, and now I'm tired early in my efforts. I did not sleep the best last night. So. But anyway, when developing etiquette, you should commit to it and keep these things in mind when you're out and about, and just until they become second nature, you should work on it. Make a point to focus on it, maybe even make an effort to practice it actively, as in going out specifically, say to the bar, to specifically listen to people, or specifically practicing the different things. I guess you can on Discord too. I found on Discord once when my mic wasn't good, I was forced, because when I did speak it would deafen everyone, so I was forced to practice listening, and it did make for a good practice in my habits. So there's that. You'll notice it. People don't want it. Like Discord, I like Discord. This is an example. If you go into a public, like not game-based server, just a public server, and if you socialize with people and you monopolize the conversation, you'll notice that they'll leave. If you're cordial and pleasant, you will attract, and you'll find that the room gets busy and the conversation goes until people of bad breeding come in. Maybe I should make an etiquette Discord server. That's actually a good idea. I want to make a few things, and I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing in the coming months for survival. So it's going to be touch and go for me. I've enjoyed my time practicing these habits and developing the discipline to maintain them. I've truly enjoyed reading, and the way I've done this is I've watching the stream, and so I'm reading it and I'm reading it again. And this is the second time I've read, at least the second time I've read all of these books. And I've enjoyed that because it's helping with memory too. I feel it coming. I feel the end of the month coming, and I'm concerned that because I don't want to be out of the game. I don't want to be in the situation I'm going to be in and I have to do it because I can't. This is not appropriate place. This is discussing etiquette. Yeah. So yeah, proper etiquette. Don'ts and do's. Focus on the do's. Practice listening. Practice not using flagrant language, as in overly fragrant language, I guess you could say. Like, fragrant is a good enough word, I guess. In some situations you may want to accentuate something, but if you do it all the time, then you will be, it means nothing in the times it is truly necessary. If I call it flagrant language, overly fragrant language, guess it does. That's a good one to ponder on because I'm not sure. I've definitely got a wicked tongue, and it's getting better, of course. And I may not be worse than many, and I have lots of good habits for sure. People seem to listen. People seem to enjoy hearing me talk and just communicating and having conversations with me. So that's a good sign. Knowing I have bad habits suggests that I just don't have access to polite company, maybe. It's a state of the world that we don't have very many polite people anymore. It's a sign of the times. But you can you focus on yourself and lead by example. Maybe your family will start to follow if you do get your shit together. There's a serious level of need in life for you to stay together and be the one who is you're the most responsible for yourself, and you've got to treat yourself like you're somebody you're responsible for. It's crashing. You know what? If I cut it early, we're already over by a minute, so I'm cutting it early. I'm just done. 31 instead of 33. 2 minutes